My mother raised me in a way that encouraged me to be curious about life and purpose and the world. So yes, I questioned the kind of fundamentals of Christianity at a very, very young age, and found that whilst emotionally and spiritually I was inclined towards the faith, rationally it didn't sit with me. My father's background is very, very interesting because he was actually born a Muslim. So I was never, brought up upon Islam. So I remember going to church with my mother. I would go to church and spiritually and emotionally, it would be very, very fulfilling. But I had questions. I couldn't understand how we were worshipping the Son of God. I couldn't understand how in one moment he was the Son of God and the next moment he was the Lord. But more importantly, he was a man, that he was a human being like myself. And I couldn't understand logically and rationally how I could worship another human being. That didn't sit right with me at a very, very young age.
How did you first hear about Islam?
So I have to take you back to my very, very early childhood in order to answer this question. So I grew up in a predominantly Muslim area. It was a Bangladeshi area. And opposite where I lived, I lived on the first floor. I was about 8 years old. I would go to the living room window, lean on the living room windowsill, and I would be able to see on the ground floor opposite the road from where I live. And there was a makeshift masjid. It was actually a container at the time. But from where I would lean as a child, I could see into the prayer area of this kind of makeshift mosque. And I found it fascinating. And I would see them enter and I would see them bow and prostrate. And I would find it fascinating as a child. And I would, rush to the windowsill, a few times a day just to kind of capture this. So around the same age, unfortunately, things were quite bad at home. My parents were constantly fighting. They didn't get on. There were constant arguments, constant fights. And I remember one particular day, there was a huge fight between my mother and father. And I ran to my bedroom. I was about 8 years old. On my way to the bedroom, I took my mother's shawl. It was a beautiful kind of Asian shawl that she had been gifted by her Pakistani work colleague. And I took the shawl and I threw it onto the ground. And I made sujood. I prostrated and I said, God, and I remember I said, God, make them stop arguing. And, at that time, obviously I was a young child. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I was copying what I had seen in the masjid, and I felt that God would hear me because that was a position that was close to God. That's how I felt at the time. So that was kind of like my first experience of Islam. Fast forward 2 years, I was 10 years old. I was at school. I came home from school and we heard news that one of our classmates, who was actually in my class, he had finished school, ran over the road to purchase some playing cards that were very popular at the time. And he had got knocked over by a big truck and he died instantly. And school wrote home to all his, classmates and invited them to his funeral, which was going to take place in a couple of days' time. So I begged my mum to let me go. And there were a few of us who were non-Muslims in the class.